op-ed piece about James Brown Say It Loud at 50, which was interesting because it was in a New York Times op-ed piece. They were talking about James Brown Say It Loud. And it was a Harvard professor who just had recollections of how much fun it was to say it loud in Black Men's Crowd, and he just kind of left it there, left it hanging. I was like, wait, there's more to it. So I just figured I'd pick up on that and just sort of revisit James Brown Say It Loud in Black Men's Crowd from 50 years ago, and kind of dig into some of the significance of that song to a lot of people and a lot of energies and to the funk. So here we go. First thing we have to do is listen to the song.
All right.
Yeah.
The James Brown version of it. Because I had to find, there's a karaoke version. It's hard to find it. The lyrics better.
Just as you, as I take 2 eyes to make a pair.
we had to go through that, so now you know what we're talking about. Let's move on. The background. James Brown, a self-made entertainer, #1 soul brother and creator of the funk as we know it, was at a career crossroads in 1968, and the radical social changes of the time affected his musical production. Despite massively popular and pioneering funk hits such as Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, #1 soul in 1965, Cold Sweat, 1967, and I Got the Feeling. In early '68, Brown was concerned about his image in the community. Brown's June 1968 trip to Vietnam to entertain the U.S. troops, his proximity to the Lyndon Johnson, Hubert Humphrey White House, and his public statements to quell riots after the murder of Martin Luther King complicated his image to many of his black working class and anti-establishment fans. Aretha Franklin's respect, I just gotta give her some respect.
Yeah.
In May of '67, the Queen of Soul released her breakthrough R&B hit, which also became an instant anthem of women's affirmation and black pride. Soul music had reached a point where the audience was expecting its leaders to deliver an anthem that reflects their views. So James Brown was put on notice. Chaos of 1968. Let me try to condense that for some of y'all that weren't around. In January, the Vietnam War ran out of control. That's the Tet Offensive, if you want to look all that stuff up. It's nuts. So I'm putting in the different color things James was doing at the time. He bought a radio station in Knoxville, WGYW, and changed the letters to WJBE, the James Brown Experience. So he was busy building his empire. Okay? In March, he makes his first trip to Africa, and he talks about how that was an awakening for him, because everybody understood him, they knew him, basically, while he was there. April 4th, Martin Luther King was murdered in Memphis. We can get into it, but we don't have time. April 5th, James Brown has to play Boston, and most of you are familiar with what had to happen that night. The mayor wanted to cancel the show, and there was one black city councilman who convinced them to keep the show but televise it and tell people to stay home, right, and watch it. The next day on the West Coast, Eldridge Cleaver, Little Bobby Hutton got in a shootout with the Oakland police, and that was news across the country, and young people were like, this is some of the aftermath of King. Okay. In June, for 10 days, James Brown was in Vietnam, getting literally shot at from station to station as he was going, and bringing a tour to the troops, to all the troops. But he knew it's very complex. He had Tim Drummond, a white drummer, there specifically to show he had unity, but he wanted to let black troops know he was for them, but he wanted to let everybody know that he was a patriot, if you want to frame it like that. It was very complex. James Brown was an interesting individual. Bobby Kennedy was shot in Los Angeles at the election party for the Democratic primary in California. And that shocked a lot of people. And if anybody's old enough, they put his casket on a train and it went across the country, and mourners, you know, were there watching the train. It was heavy. So people were really losing it. August 7th, Say It Loud was recorded in Los Angeles. The single hits the radio within days. Okay. August 24th to 26th, the riots at the convention in Chicago to get out of control. Democracy is basically in ruins, as far as a lot of people are concerned. Say It Loud, R&B singles released. October 5th, it reaches #1 R&B, stays there for 6 weeks, and it reaches #10 pop, which is quite a reach for a song talking about black people to go #1. October 17th, Tommy Smith and John Carlos do the Olympic fist protests, and I just threw this in. Apollo 8 reaches the moon, and Christmas Day, the astronauts reach Genesis, because that's how crazy 1968 was. It was a mess. And one of the few people that emerged triumphant in that year was James Brown. The recording of Say It Loud, did I skip anything? Okay. The recording of Say It Loud at the Vox Studios on Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles on a Wednesday afternoon, August 7th, including Brown's mainstay lineup, Wayman Reed, Richard Cush Griffith, Fred Wesley, his first recording session with James, Alfred Pee Wee Ellis, co-wrote a lot of the song, Maceo Parker, St. Clair Pinckney, Clyde, the funky drummer Stubblefield on drums, Jimmy Nolan on guitar, Charles Shrell on bass, unknown children from a nearby elementary school, prep academy. One source named the prep academy, but I couldn't find any reference to it, so I didn't want to name it. But it did make me think about something. Let me go back to this. Where did the kids come from? So I had Google Maps, and the recording studio is still there on Melrose Avenue. And if you look on the left, on the right, Francis Blinn, there's 2 elementary schools within a few blocks. And it made me really think, what's the level of our research? And I said, if Paul McCartney had some children from a Liverpool playground sing on a hit song, wouldn't they have been identified by now? Wouldn't somebody have gone and looked them up and said, hey, what was that like? Boom, boom, boom. And we just, some kids. Wait a minute. Some kids who are part of something powerful. And it's interesting that Los Angeles has right up here is Paramount Studios, the movie studio and the sound studio and the elementary school right there. LA is nuts, but anyway. So I just wanted to have that. So I wanted to mention this. Fred Wesley recalls his first recording session with Brown on Say It Loud. And I'll read it. Mr. Brown was in control now. Pee Wee took his place in the reed section, and James counted it off. The groove was already strong, but when James counted it off and began to dance and direct it, it took on a new power. All of a sudden, the fatigue I had been feeling was gone. The kids were doing their chant with a new energy. In fact, the energy level in the whole studio was lifted. James went straight through the whole tune, and that was it. After about 4 hours of preparation, Say It Loud and Black and I'm Proud went down in one take.
Wow.
So you musicians, one take.
But you have to be good musicians.
So here's some of the sort of factors, the reasons why Say It Loud happened. Following up on James Meredith's March Against Fear, if anybody remembers this or saw it in Eyes on the Prize, James Meredith was the first black to integrate University of Mississippi, and he started a march through Mississippi in the summer of 1966 saying, I'm tired of all this fear going on. And he was shot on the second day of the march. And at that point, all the civil rights leadership, Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, Floyd McKissick, the Congress of Racial Equality, all these people showed up and said, we're gonna finish the march for him, bring everybody and finish the march for him. And so that's what happened. And it goes on, and it has its own history, but what's not told much is James was affected by this, and he went to visit Meredith in the hospital. And he talks about this in various writings. He said that affected my life because here I am, a public figure, and I'm not really doing anything. And this guy is an individual who just sort of out of his courage and conviction did this stuff. And so 2 weeks after this, James recorded Don't Be a Dropout, which is the first of his message songs, explicit message songs that he did. Another reason was it was a response to critics who called him a sellout for going to Vietnam. Means of healing after the deaths of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy that year. According to one account by Hank Ballard, the song was a result of intimidation by gun-toting militants visiting Brown backstage. And he did have encounters with the members of the Black Panther Party. And Brown mentions finding a grenade outside of his hotel room the day before the recording. However you want to interpret that. It was also a more direct use of his clout as a public spokesperson on black issues through direct language, rhymes, and chants. He really isn't singing on this song. He's just laying rhymes out, right? Which kind of speaks to the next generation of the music. And a general affirmation of black pride, especially for those who had lived their lives black and ashamed. And I remember interviewing this guy, this musician in the Bay Area. He worked for the Lumpin', which is the Black Panthers band. And I said, what did you think of, Say It Loud? He said, man, it was the greatest thing in the world, because up until that point, I was black and ashamed. Brown explained the song in this way in a 1998 interview. I was trying to do two things. One, give the power structure, which in America means the white power structure, a way to understand how we felt and know that we had people who could do things and just wanted a fair shake. Two, I wanted young black kids to wake up and realize they should be proud of who they were, get an education, try to make something of themselves. Proud and bad are two different things. I never wanted to separate. My thing was to let the pride be there and to let people get into the skin of a black man and realize he only wants to be recognized for the contributions he has made. So it's interesting when he delivers in his own way his response. The immediate response to Say It Loud. The 45 RPM single shoots to #1 soul. Immense pride sweeps the community as a direct result. Black had been in vernacular use among activists and young people, but after Say It Loud, black becomes the unquestionable term for people of African descent in the US. It would not become the official term until the 1980 census. Popular black artists began to record music that included explicit references to black racial identity, black consciousness, blackness, whites, and whiteness. A quiet backlash to Brown follows, with his music played less frequently on white pop radio, his bookings in white arenas dry up, according to him, and he rarely appears on TV variety shows or in pop movies. Brown would not have another pop top 10 hit until 1986, which was Living in America. Paid the cost to be the boss. After Say It Loud, James Brown was put on Richard Nixon's enemies list, which had a lot of leftists and other activists in it, and it included John Lennon and other radical activists of the day. Brown was harassed by the IRS to repay his debts, specifically by selling, they kept telling him, we don't want this, we don't want that, sell your radio stations, sell the things that you have that impress the community the most. And that's what happened, he had to give up all that stuff. But he has no regrets about his decision to write, record, release, and promote the song. He says, the song cost me a lot of my crossover audience. The racial makeup of my concerts was mostly black after that. I don't regret recording it though, even if it was misunderstood. It was badly needed at the time. It helped the Afro-Americans in general and the dark-skinned man in particular, and I'm proud of that. The Olympic protests. When Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their glove fists at the 1968 Mexico City Games, on October 17, 1968, Say It Loud, Black and Proud was the #1 R&B song in America. So you can imagine somebody seeing this, turn on the radio and they hear I'm black and I'm proud, and these things all converging. Wait, a new lyrical language. Brown does not sing, he rhymes in overt racial terms. I worked on jobs, my feet and my hands, all the work I did was for the other man. With Say It Loud, Brown is speaking to power directly. He is employing the oratory cadence of Malcolm X, not Martin Luther King. Okay? He is creating a new lyrical language for black popular music, a language that is in sync with the movements in the streets. Within months, black artists would begin to release songs with explicit racial terminology. It was in to speak directly across the racial divide. Black and Proud music. In May of '69, Sly and the Family Stone released Don't Call Me Whitey on their multi-platinum album Stand. The song is a challenge across the divide between equals. If you think about how that's Don't Call Me Whitey, and it's between equal, and that is a framework that it helps create. September, the Temptations released Message from a Black Man, which is also a play on the book Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam produced, right? On their Puzzle People album, the album went top 5, 6 weeks as R&B #1. The song features spoken monologue about blacks, whites, and equal rights, and uses the Say It Loud chant. Say it loud. I'm black, and most of y'all remember, some of y'all, okay, well anyway. That was, what I'm saying is these were top shelf pop artists that were doing this, okay? We could get into the Last Poets and other folks, and all really, if you think about the Last Poets and Gil Scott-Heron, the stuff they released didn't happen until after Say It Loud. Say It Loud made that type of language sellable, for lack of a better, if nothing else. In the fall of '69, Nina Simone released To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, which Aretha Franklin remade a year later. Reached number 8 sold. Structurally, the song is closer to gospel music, but lyrically, it made a bold statement of affirmation. In the spring of 1970, Stevie Wonder released Heaven Help Us All with the lyrics, "Heaven help the black man if he struggles one more day. Heaven help the white man if he turns his back away." It rang like a Bob Dylan song to me. But I just had to put Stevie because I was showing all these big stars that like, this is now the language. This is what we can do. And and this is really not that far from the Jimmy Lynch stuff. Because it's like, we are now free to say who we are in every way we want to. Okay? Rhythm and attitude. A new message requires a new rhythm, and Brown's chopping, urgent funk beats reinforced a new attitude of self-determination. Can you play the karaoke of, you can keep it low. Self-determination coming from the black community. A message. Coming in the black community. That's popularized by the Black Panthers. Yeah, that's good. The funk rhythm is driving and confident. It does not pause for contemplation or reflection. It is here and now. One cannot sing "We Shall Overcome" to the funk beat of "Say It Loud." Okay, so try it. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday.
If you do sing it over, it gives you more drive.
It gives you something. It gives you dizziness. But what I'm saying is the message and the rhythm organically are linked together. You just can't have one and artificially introduce the other. At the most basic level, funk can be boiled down to a combination or a collision of rhythm and attitude. If you think of all your favorite music, Lakeside, Turn Up the Music, Slave, it's rhythm and it's attitude. It's a whole lot of other stuff, but it's rhythm and attitude. And I didn't introduce this, but Fred Wesley talks about this in his book, Hit Me Fred, and he said, I always thought jazz and funk were basically the same thing, except one has more attitude. Jazz is subtle and complex, and funk is put on the floor and aggressive. But he's saying it's the same thing. I'm not gonna argue with Fred Wesley. So, and he's the reason for most of this funk that we're talking about. Rhythm and attitude. Jazz players, blues players, gospel performers all learned this while imitating and incorporating James Brown's funk formulas into their respective works. Soul Brother #1 was the source. Okay. Hip-hop beats and rhymes can be understood as a combination of rhythm and attitude. That's fairly obvious. The rhythms of James Brown funk and the explicit affirming truths of Say It Loud are the fundamental ingredients of funk to this day. Okay? If we were pressed for time, I'd stop there, but we're not, so I'm going to go just a couple more. We're always pressed for time, but Say It Loud at 50. On August 20th, the New York Times published an op-ed piece by Harvard Law professor Randall Kennedy, who recalled fondly the Black is Beautiful message in the song. He writes, "We had both internalized our society's derogation of blackness at the time. Yet no entertainer equaled Brown's vocalization of African America's newly triumphal sense of self-acceptance." Ironically, Professor Kennedy claims that other than the refrain on Black and I'm Proud, the lyrics of Say It Loud are wholly forgettable. That's what he said. That's what kind of floored me. I was like, the person who wrote this New York Times op-ed piece. I was like, well, I was riding with you, but you missed me there. They bared little of the artistry that graces lift every voice and sing, and he goes into these other traditional songs, which are great traditional songs. They affirm tradition. Say It Loud is breaking tradition, okay? And one of the fundamental breaks it's doing, I didn't even bother to write about it, is that it's doing away with all these metaphors. If you think about blues, if you think about the gospel, it's metaphors are the building blocks of the lyrics. Okay, it's one day, someday we'll be freedom. It's these abstract things. Okay, say it like these lyrics are not abstract; they're legit, and they're on the ground. They're where the people at, the young people are at, and that's why this is such a fundamental sort of Kickstarter, if you will, for what rappers started doing right after this. That's their different strokes. He makes points to emphasize Brown's bootstrap politics and is cozying up to Nixon, Reagan, and Strom Thurmond. He fails to mention Brown's support of Robert Kennedy's and Hubert Humphrey's candidacies, and the writer did not mention Brown's public contributions to the NAACP, the Congress of Racial Equality, and his very public donation to the H. Rap Brown Defense Fund. And H. Rap Brown was no moderate. The point of this is that it's an incomplete narrative. It's an incomplete version. The mainstream narrative is going to be incomplete. It should be the goal of events such as this to deliver the breadth of the funk story in a more complete rendering. Okay? It's paramount that the story of the funk, that the history of funk reflects the full range of views of the black community, because that was the source of the funk in the first place. I think that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
I got a statement. People like to remember that James Brown was what they call cozying up to Nixon. Nixon had made promises to James, because Nixon knew that he needed James's audience. So he made some promises, and James always felt let down by Nixon. He wasn't a fan in the end, because Nixon didn't do what he said he was gonna do. And James Brown was always a person that knew that black people could do whatever they wanted to do, as long as they had the means. So at one point, James had two bands. One band would play and the next band would go to the other city. And he would fly every night. He played nightly. He's playing 335 dates out of the year. 300, think about that. He was 11 months on and 1 month off. But the reason he was doing it, because he was buying radio stations, because black people couldn't get radio play. And his idea was, we'll have our own radio stations. We don't need you to get airplay. And going back to them making James Brown a public enemy, it was J. Edgar Hoover, that said, after Martin Luther King, we're not going to have another black Messiah. And they were nervous because after James stopped the riot, they were like, if somebody can stop a riot, he can start one. So it wasn't long after that they started going after him. And they didn't really want his money, they wanted his radio station. They
Wanted to silence what he was doing. To maybe get other people to maybe do the same.
Yep.
First of all, thank you. I enjoyed your presentation. I like your point about the narrative. I wanted to ask you, how do you factor in Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn in terms of this disruption of narrative away from this kind of futuristic notion of freedom? Do you think that what we see represented in Respect and Say It Loud and I'm Black and I'm Proud is part of a progression of rhetorical context that begins with Mississippi Goddamn, even though she's not funk?
Well, see, this is the thing. Nina Simone, in certain respects, stands alone. Because it's interesting you bring that up, because I just did Nina Simone in my lecture that I was doing last night that had me here and not there and not here. Because this movement, if you follow Nina Simone, she was doing I Love You Porgy and these early things, and she was wearing the evening gown, and she looked miserable, but she was extremely talented and doing her thing. And then 1963, the bombing of the Birmingham bombing set her off. And on her own terms, not worrying about whether it sells or not, she went and just ripped into this whole diatribe against, Southern Jim Crow and how, everything we do, they think it's a communist plot. I mean, she was hell bent. And that's part of the thing, because she wasn't trying to market anything. But when she was performing it, most of the tapes of her performance, she's in a concert hall with predominantly white audience. She's overseas. She's not in what you might say is the main line of the rhythm and blues community. Okay, so from her point of view, you show her doing I Love You Porgy and some of her earlier stuff. You show her doing Mississippi Goddamn. And then her 1968-69 period, where she's got that African hairdo and I Got Life. You guys seen that stuff? Where she's, I mean, it's just a powerful sort of rejection of all of the things she was doing before, right? And she writes about it in her memoir. She says, I realize now it wasn't just equality, we need a total revolution in this society. You should go read I Put a Spell on You, Nina Simone's memoir. It'll kick you in the head. She was no joke. Having said that, she was sort of this comet that sort of came into orbit and passed through. And so it's hard, you can line up the songs and say, yes, that fits. But in terms of what people were hearing, they were hearing Stand By Me. They were hearing Keep On Pushing. They were hearing this main line of soul music. And then you heard Respect, and then you heard James Brown, and you heard, what you heard in the main line was this progression. What Nina Simone did, I felt was spectacular, but in some cases it wasn't heard. Like Jimi Hendrix's stuff. Some of his stuff was spectacular. Black folks didn't hear it when it first came out.
But how do you account for that when Stokely Carmichael says that she became the voice of the movement?
She was in the movement. They were together in the movement, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were on, she was in radio airplay. That's all I'm saying. But I felt affected by it, but it was, the troubling part was nobody else nobody followed up on that. Nobody went that direction with her. And I was hoping that would happen. Go ahead.
Strange Fruit. I never heard her say it, but I heard it on a record.
Mm-hmm. Nina Simone doing Strange Fruit.
Strange Fruit.
Yeah.
When I heard the gentleman speaking about radios and how they didn't have them, when I was a child, I lived in this town in between Wilberforce and Dayton called Xavier. And we had to have transistors, radios, and so at about maybe 10 o'clock at night, you turn it toward a certain angle so you could get a radio station from Tennessee in order to listen to it. And James Brown was one I was quite interested in seeing. And so someone said, oh, he's gonna be at Wilberforce University. And I was about 15. So Daddy took me out there so I could go see him as a college student. And I got to see him for the first time really close in this old building called Shorter Hall. And so many years later, I was just like impressed with the whole thing and the feeling of it and being right there and seeing it close. Well, years later, I had a daughter, Peggy, and she was out at Wilberforce doing something or another, and she came home and she said, oh, Mommy, look what I had. She says, James Brown stopped and did an autograph for me. And so it said, love you, Peggy, James Brown, you know, like that. And so she was so happy about it that she wrote a heart around it and kind of messed it up. And I was like, okay, you know, like that. But those are some of the one memory that I have of James Brown.
And it helps to have the whole narrative, right? You know, if they ever bring this up again, 2020 will spend half the show on the chase, police chase thing, which is a thing. But, you know, I've seen it. Let's move on. I'm not trying to deny any of this other stuff. He was a very troubled man, misogynistic, violent towards women he knew. He had a troubled time since his mother left him when he was 4. I mean, he had drama, like we all do. Anything else?
I do have something else. James always prided himself in sort of being an example of what black people could be at the highest level. And he also made a point of being accessible to to his people. I remember, I got brothers that play music, there's 5 of us. And, we played music really young, and my mom, took us to go see James Brown. And she thought, by that time, she knew that we were gonna do it for a living. We were, I think, the youngest was 5, the oldest was 13. So she got me and my little brother out of school. We were 5 and 8. And she wanted us to meet James Brown, so she took us to the hotel. And James was already going, because he was traveling on his jet. But she knocked on the door, and it was Maceo, St. Clair, Pee Wee, and Bobby Bird. But you know, James is traveling in a jet, and his band is sleeping in a room, right? But they signed all our autographs, you know, talked to us, and gave us some encouragement. But what James always knew, that with the funk, especially with the funk, he knew that was the delivery system of his message. And he and Bobby Bird I was reading, he and Bobby Bird would talk about, they'd be talking about the funk and plans with the funk. And somebody would walk in the room that they, you know, didn't feel belonged in the conversation, and they just stopped talking to that person until that person left the room. And then they make more plans with it. Because James Brown knew how important it was, what he was doing, and how that rhythm was the delivery system. There's the conversation he has with his band, and he reminds them, I'll shorten it up, he reminds them that they're not holding instruments, they're holding drums. That he's gonna deliver his message with that rhythm. So going back to We Shall Overcome, had We Shall Overcome been sung over that beat, it would have had more meaning. We shall overcome, right? Now it sounds like something that's gonna happen today, as opposed to something that we hope happens in a few years. So that was James's thing. He knew that he was his people's manhood, and he knew that he was our example in real time of what we could be. So he spoke in our language, and he spoke with rhythm, because he knew that rhythm will cut through all of it. Rhythm will cut through all of it, where a message doesn't always do it. And that was it. You tell us, y'all holding drums. That ain't saxophone, that's a drum, son. And that's how we do it.
That's great.
There's nothing else to say after that.
I'd just like to add one thing, that what a horrible year 1968 was. We were living in Washington DC at the time. We'd been married just a year. I have a brother in the Marines, he's retired now, but he was at Vietnam for the Tet Offensive. Then came Martin Luther King's assassination, Bobby Kennedy's assassination, a horrible Chicago Democratic Convention. At the time of the Martin Luther King assassination, there was a riot in Washington, and we had a chance to do something I am glad I never had to do again, and I hope no one ever has to do again. A curfew was imposed. We went up on the roof of our apartment building near DuPont Circle, and the Capitol Dome was obscured by the smoke from the fires. And people said, why did they start the fires? And my thought then and remains was, why not? Why not?
That's where people was at.
Well, since he said that, I was living in DC at that time, and it was sad because I'm not racist. I don't know why I have to say that, but it might come off as racist. But at that time, black people had their own stores, and they burned them down. And then they had to put Soul Brother on the store so people wouldn't loot them or whatever. I mean, it was just crazy.
We had a small Safeway near our apartment too, and people were lined up, came from U Street over to DuPont Circle to get some food. It was really bad.
So this gets into bigger questions, bigger issues. This is why, if you recall, Martin Luther King was working on a poor people's campaign, and he was gonna have another march on Washington, a poor people's march on Washington, to to really shame the United States for what they were doing and not doing. And, so all these things are pieces to, something that was chaotic and terrible. And
The Poor People's March did come off, in
It
spite of
happened.
his assassination. Yes, his lieutenants made sure it happened.
Just want to point out too, that we are very fortunate to have a first-year experience here at UD. All first-year students, they alternate between the symphony, the ballet, and the opera, and there's a theme connected to it that is the theme for their first-year Commons classroom experience, which connects to the production. And one of the things I've tried to do in this position was connect my work with that first-year theme. This year it's power and vulnerability, which this is all about. And it's, the production they're gonna see is Dracula, done by the ballet. And that may sound like a far reach to you, but I don't think it is. I think the whole story of the funk movement is one of power and vulnerability.
This gets into another question that I come across a lot, and that's a term that you could call fear of funk. And this is something you can think about when you talk about a lot of folks are doing something or working on a program and doesn't get funded, or these people had a show where we talked a lot about these great big bands, and all of a sudden they couldn't get booked and they were smaller bands. For some reason, they kept saying people didn't want to see the big bands. People were afraid of these big bands because they were just, as Chuck D puts it, too black and too strong. And they didn't, when Chuck D said that, I'm like, well, that's nice you're saying that, but your beats aren't really strong enough for me. That's when I would listen to what he says and go play some Rare Essence, go play some real hard trouble funk. You know, I play some music that I think is too, but it's not black in a violent way. It's just soulful. It's just rich and thick and chocolate in the mix. That's the funk, right? And I mean, there's really love all up in it. You just have to not be afraid of it. But a lot of people have fear of funk. They don't want to let it do what it does.
I would just like to say that thank you very much for that. I really, really enjoyed it. And when I didn't want to put a downer on it, but when you said fear of funk, I've got this radio station called Brick FM in Scottish Borders, Funk and Soul, Scottish Borders. And PPL in London put us out of business temporarily. We're going to get back in. Over a small dispute. But then, when I said to them that, well, we were concerned where all this money is we've been paying every year, because we know, and I know from all the Funk Chronicles that I've been broadcasting on behalf of Mr. Webb and the Funk Music Hall of Fame and Exhibition Centre, of all the artists who had not been receiving their royalties. So when I took that up with them, they actually made a debt out of their lawyers in order to put us out of business through the court.
Oh, they didn't want to discuss it with you, which is trouble.
And so thankfully, the positive thing is that Mr. Webb here now is going to be having his own station, the Brick FM will be established there, and all the artists and everybody who's involved here, what we're recording today is going to be broadcast at some time. But we will establish ourselves again, so I've given them a machine that we can use an ISDN link directly from Dayton to Scottish Borders. Brick FM will be up again there. Fear of funk is what you finished with there, and I thank you for that.
Yeah. So I think all of us here have transcended that long ago, okay, in this room. So we just need to branch that out. So.
Is there, not including the music groups that mix funk with what they're doing now, but is there a specific group that's out there now that you would say is funk? You know, not including the ones who use mix.
Well, in the Bay Area, there's a guy named Ron Cat Spearman, and he played guitar for George Clinton for about 10 years. And I loved him then because, I don't know if y'all remember, George did a real wacky rendition of Shake, Rattle, and Roll. But the guitarist has to sort of do all the fingering on that song. And George played it for like 12 minutes on stage, and I saw Ron Cat in the back just holding that whole thing down, and he wouldn't let it go. I was like, that he's advanced, like Gary Sider and Blackbird McKnight and Michael Hampton and the great funk guitarists. And then he left George and created a solo band of his own, Cat Delic. And you can Google him, you can look him up. The last album is called Dance on the Mothership, and it's some healthy, original, 5-star funk that fills up your soul, makes you move, and it just does what it does. He's a songwriter as well as lead guitarist. And so when it comes down to it, and it's gonna come down to it because George Clinton says he's retiring. So you're gonna have to start hunting for the real deal.
So I saw, like if you Google funk, you get Bruno Mars or you get Snoop
Bruno
Dogg,
Mars.
but they're not the funk that I remember growing up.
No.
So that's not the new funk now, is it?
It's the little G. But see, this is tricky because we're generations removed now, and there are people that are doing tributes to the records that sampled funk in the 80s. There's Sly Fifth Avenue, who does a whole album of tribute to Dr. Dre, which is, the Chronic album is an entire P-Funk loop manifesto. And so we're at this point now. There's a group called Brownout. They do an album, came out this year, if you're looking for the new stuff, it's called Fear of a Brown Planet. It's a band doing covers of Public Enemy songs, just as a funk band, as an instrumental band. And all those instrumentals are basically, right, reworkings of Public Enemy's sampling of James Brown in the first place. So it sort of recycles, renews, but it's the funk, but it's a double loop of it. But that's where people are at. But there's some original funk. There's a guy out here called Freak Bass, who worked with Bootsy, and he has some brand new music, new video. It's a lot of fun. And Freak Bass, I'm a fan of the high volume bass lines, that stuff in the Zap, the Lakeside. I like the high volume bass line. Although Marshall Jones is one of my favorite all-time bass, but I like the big bump. Yeah. So some of that's hard to find, but in the Bay Area, we keep that slap funk going all the time. So it's all around here, and maybe that's a regional thing.
Yeah, I was interested in to move into something you said earlier about the vocal delivery on Say It Loud and the rhyming format, and it made me think about the whole notion of pre-hip hop rhyme. That's a real vast kind of body of work. Then it made me think about also what James Brown does on the album King, There It Is, or with King Heroin, and all that kind of talking, and sometimes rhyming, sometimes just preaching over music. So I was wondering what you could say, if you could say more about just that whole pre-hip hop toasting, speech and rhyme style that's going on, and it seems to also have a real kind of subject matter boost with 1960s as well.
Yeah, you have to, I don't know if tread lightly is the word, but you have to finesse that, because the sort of canon for what hip hop history is that the rhyming, the syncopated rhyming on beat is associated with the sound systems in Jamaica. And DJ Kool Herc, Clive Campbell, was doing these outdoor DJ parties, and others were doing them, and the selector would mix the records, and then the toasting would take, the folks would make up insults to each other over an instrumental reggae beat, which stayed consistent. And if you ever dealt with a reggae beat, danced to it, it's consistent, it holds, it holds you. And so there's no space to really rhyme around it. You can't do some jazz scat, you have to rhyme in it, you're locked in it. And so that's sort of the main line discussion of how that sort of hip hop rhyming style made its way to the Bronx. And then once Clive and other DJs got to the Bronx, they played the reggae and said, no, we don't want that. We want the breaks, we want the beat, we want the James Brown beat. And he delivered, that's what he did. That's what Kool Herc said. I said, I came from Jamaica, these people, I had my crew, the Herculoids, Kool Herc and the Herculoids, and, you know, we did what we did, but they didn't like the reggae music, so we did the same thing over, the beats that the kids like. Jimmy Castor Bunch, It's Just Begun, Apache, stuff like that, and the James Brown tracks. However, James Brown was revered before, during, and after that whole phase. And the fact that he was already freestyling on, There Was a Time, you know, there was a time, do the boogaloo. It sounded like he was making up the rhymes, making up the dances as he was going. Well, that's freestyling. But he's using a certain rhythm that is urgent, it's in the moment, it's not millionaire, it's not imagining a different future, it's imagining a present while you're in the present. And that's what James could do. He could take you there and keep you there. And so I think, I look at Say It Loud, I listen to Say It Loud, I was like, well, this is where sort of the genesis of hip hop rhyming comes from. That's my take. But I didn't grow up listening to Jamaican sound systems. Maybe someone else would have a different take. But Kool Herc would sort of advocate this as well. But here we are. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that working together. I mean, we're here in the funk capital of the world.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. Now, I come from Oakland, and there's a young man named Larry Graham who went to Castlemont High School, who was really the first person to put that bass line down, right? Well, even before and during his time in Sly and the Family Stone. So there, you can sort of make some kind of case about foundational elements from Oakland, but that's not that important. It's beautiful we have a capital for the funk, okay? And that's what we have. But you can always tension it a little bit out this way and that way. And so I see, James Brown as a foundational element, a cornerstone of the funk, and a foundational element of hip hop. And if you want to go back and forth, there really hasn't been healthy back and forth between, how do we deal with the funk roots and the ragamuffin roots of hip hop. Okay, there's one book that's out of print by S.H. Fernando Jr. It's called The New Beats, and it has back-to-back chapters: the funk roots of hip hop and the ragamuffin roots of hip hop. You can track that thing down.
The New Beats?
The New Beats is done in the 80s.
Could you do me a favor and go back for the benefit of these students who came in after you started, go back to the 68 events? I know they have no idea what they are. Just so they can see it for a couple minutes before we
Well, there's one, the
transition.
Olympic protests, 1968, Tommy Smith, Raise Your Glove Fist, the song we were talking about, Say It Loud, it's the #1 song.
One where you have the chronological list. There,
Chaos in
in
1968. It's the Vietnam War. The U.S. government talked about it as being a stalemate
Yeah.
for about 3 or 4 years until this. This is something James Brown did. If it's in orange, James Brown was doing it. He bought a radio station. He first went to Africa. Martin Luther King shot in Memphis. Folks still haven't recovered. BPP is the Black Panther Party, and Eldridge Cleaver was the biggest hellraiser and biggest headache in the party, and he decided that was the day to shoot back at the Oakland police. It was a big deal. And little Bobby died, little Bobby Hutton. James Brown went to Vietnam thinking that was the patriotic thing to do. It almost destroyed his career. Bobby Kennedy, the brother of John Kennedy, was shot on election night, California Democratic primary, in the room. Everybody had the silly hats on, all this stuff. It was terrible. And Brown report, Say It Loud. The Chicago Democratic Convention is where you're supposed to have your ceremony anointing your candidate. And it was riots and it was chaos and debauchery. I had to look this stuff up. When I was younger, when I was your age, I asked my mom, I said, "Mom, what happened in 1968? She just said, you don't wanna know. I mean, I wasn't ready to go there. And I didn't have, so anyway, Say It Loud, the song, and then Tommy Smith in the Olympic protests, and then the end of the year, read Genesis when he reached the moon. It's kind of heavy and sort of puts a bow on the year from hell.
Thank you very much for doing that. Let's give, Dr. Vincent a round of applause.